So, namaskar friends and welcome once again. Now, we are into lecture number 6 and in this lecture we will be talking about concepts of Vāk and Sabda in Indian philosophy. As we talk about communication, communication skill is very important, but then how to communicate, what to communicate, what is the role of speech and Śabda, that is word. As per Indian philosophy, let us try to understand this. So, from Vāk to Shunya, sound, meaning and consciousness, Indian philosophy offers a radically different epistemic imagination, a different understanding compared to what we understand. Reality is first heard before it is seen. This is what is believed. Across Vedic, grammatical, Tantric and yogic traditions, vibration, utterance, resonance and silence become foundational to being. So, more than the written words, the speech making becomes very important. This is why the concepts of Vāk, that is speech, and Sabda, that is word or sound, and Nāda, resonance, they recur as civilizational categories of thought throughout the Indian knowledge system. As Harold Coward also argues, in the Indian grammatical tradition, language is not secondary to thought, rather language and consciousness emerge together as co-constitutive structures of reality. So, language is not devoid from what we think, rather they are co-constitutive. The Rig Vedic Vāk Śuddhi is one of the most philosophical astonishing hymns in world literature, because speech itself speaks in the first person. So, speech itself talks about itself, it owns itself. It says, Aham Rashti Sangmani Vasunam Chikitusi Prathama Jagyanam. That means, I am the sovereign power, the gatherer of treasures, the knower, the foremost among those worthy of worship. This is one of the most powerful declarations of feminine cosmic agency in the Veda, where Vāk, speech, speaks as the principle that binds gods, knowledge and order together. That means, speech is not simply speaking anything, speech is the controlling power. Speech is what makes you what you are, and that is why friends we always talk about communication, how the world will know us, how the world will form an impression about us based on the kind of expressions that we will give of the self. So, it is an ontological declaration that manifestation itself is expressive power. Vāk is revelation, agency and cosmic creativity. So, we are shaped by our communicative ability, our communication. Scholar John Gonda states that Vedic speech is not mere phonetic articulation, but sacred potency that affects reality. But is speech just a jumbling of word sounds? Is communication having a good sense of language alone? No, it is the sum total of our thought process, meaning making and expressing. Mimamsā, what is Mimamsā? In Mimamsā, Sabda is elevated from ordinary speech to an autonomous and infallible means of knowledge. When we discuss something, when we do vivechana or analysis of something, the ordinary speech becomes an infallible means of knowledge. The Veda is held to be apaurished, that means it is not authored by any human or divine subject. So, therefore, it is untouched by limitations of intention, memory or error. So, Jain Mohanty insightfully observes that Mimamsa anticipates structural concerns by treating meaning as embedded in a pre-existing linguistic order rather than in private psychology. We are all part of that cosmic order in which meaning is made. So, believing that meaning is devoid of our existence is something which can be always questioned. So, what we speak has a lot insight and in depth making of it than all that we can see and perceive. So, this makes language the very site of continuity between cosmic order and human knowledge. Nyāya, from sacred speech to semantic precision. So, from Vāk to Mimamsā to Nyāya. Nyāya transforms the discourse on speech from sacred revelation into a disciplined inquiry into how words produce valid cognition. So, language, although its origin is not considered to be that of human, and that is why it is believed that it is embedded in our consciousness, we find that at a later stage we find its use in our daily life, and we see how from sacred revelation it turns into a disciplined inquiry in how it produces valid cognition. So, its central concern is no longer the divinity of speech, but the epistemological question, under what conditions does language generate true knowledge. Now, as I said friends, just having good sound understanding and grasp over language is not what makes us good communicators. It should also have a capacity of meaning making, of true knowledge. So, this shift is philosophically decisive because it moves the discussion from metaphysical reference to analytic precision and cognitive reliability. So, Nyaya's larger project is to distinguish valid knowledge, prama, from doubt, error and fallacy, and within this framework verbal cognition or Sabda bodh becomes one of the most sophisticated achievements of Indian semantics. So, whatever you speak is not language, but we also need to see how it acts and reacts on other subjects in order to effectively communicate whatever we want to. According to Nyaya, a sentence yields meaningful cognition only when several indispensable conditions are fulfilled. A good communication is not simple information. It is conveying your knowledge, your thought process, your ideology, your deep seated belief and everything. The first is akanksha, that is expectancy. Words must mutually require one another to complete sense. So, how we can make it meaningful if we are talking about a sentence? Is it just a jumbling of different words in any fashion? No. A sentence that makes meaningful sense is in the true sense a sentence. So, the second is yogyata, semantic compatibility. So, first, what is expected of you when you are speaking and whether it is semantically compatible. Fine, the meanings must be logically fit to coexist. A sentence like fire is cold fails because it violates semantic fitness. Fire can never be cold. Fine. So, when you speak, what is expected of you? Fine. What makes a complete sense, and then what kind of words and expressions are fit, that is also very important. The third is sannidhi, proximity. The words must occur close enough in sequence for the mind to synthesize them into a single cognition. While choosing a sentence, you need to pay attention to expectancy, semantic compatibility and proximity. Certain words fit together while certain others look incompatible. The later thinkers add tatparya, that is speaker's intention, especially crucial when words are ambiguous, because context determines which meaning is intended. All of you know, friends, words behave differently in different situations and contexts. So, we also need to understand the contextual meaning. We sometimes will find that a particular word sounds ambiguous, but then if we look at the overall situation in which that has been used, we can probably get to understand that. So, when we refer to mouse in a household, in a granary, we know that we are referring to mouse, that animal, but then if we are referring to a mouse in a sophisticated modern computer lab, we know what does it mean. So, together these conditions show that meaning is not reducible to isolated words, but emerges from a structured relation among syntax, sense, sequence and intention. So, what do I intend to communicate through this? I intend to tell you that while constructing your sentences, while interacting with people, you should not only think about your grammatical and linguistic competence, rather you should also look at how the sentences and the utterances that you are using in the real life situation will create an impression or effect on the people who really matter. The next is called a Sphota. Sphota, that is meaning as flash, totality and revelation. Anadi nidhanam brahma sabda tattvam jadaksharam. That means the beginningless and endless Brahma is the principle of word. The doctrine of Sphota is one of the most sophisticated contributions of Indian philosophy of language, especially in Bhartṛhari's Vakyapadya. The term Sphota literally means bursting forth, sudden disclosure or flash of manifestation. The philosophical claim is radical, meaning is not grasped by mechanically adding one sound to another or one word to the next. Instead, it appears as an invisible whole in a sudden act of cognition. So, suddenly when we hear something, our consciousness comes into play and makes a meaning out of it. So, Vakyast Atma Sphota, it is said that the essence of the sentence is Sphoṭa, that sudden disclosure. This means that what truly communicates is not the succession of audible sounds, dhvani, but the holistic burst of sentence meaning that flashes in consciousness. The sounds merely trigger this cognitive event. So, whatever you speak, its overall impact comes from the understanding of the whole speech rather than individual words. Harold Coward, in his classic work The Sport Theory of Language, argues that Bhartṛhari anticipates a profoundly holistic model of cognition in which language, awareness and meaning arise together as a single event of consciousness. So, meaning is not conveyed through language alone, it also depends on our awareness and it also appears to our consciousness as a whole, not as piecemeal, that language is different, our awareness is different. Sphota challenges linear models of meaning. We may hear language sequentially in time, but understanding itself is non-sequential. The mind does not merely store fragments, it synthesizes them into an indivisible flash. So, when we are talking to people, their meaning making and our intentions to communicate meaning, they are simultaneously at work and not necessarily our words fall to their ears verbally. They are appealing to their cognition and based on their awareness of the whole world and all their experiences, the meaning is conceptualized in their mind. The most important critical insight of this slide is that Indian sonic philosophy refuses to absolutize language. Sonic philosophy, what is that? Sound. Sound is very important, and that is why language is not considered absolute in itself. Unlike traditions that stop at revelation through speech, mantra or logos, that is rational thought or writing, this trajectory culminates in a point where all articulated meaning must dissolve. Let us say Nāda Brahma, sound as ontological vibration. Nāda Brahma, Nāda is also considered Brahma. So, the dictum that Nāda Brahma, sound is Brahma, or more philosophical interpretation may be it is the ultimate reality, the sonic vibration. It suggests that the deepest structures of existence is resonance prior to form. So, even before we speak, speech is brewing within us, it is taking shape, and there is something in consciousness that is expressed through our speech. In this framework, sound is not merely something heard by the ear, it refers to the first subtle movement through which the unmanifest begins to become manifest. Guy L. Beck in his work on sonic theology argues that sacred sound is in Hindu traditions should not be reduced to symbolism or representation, rather sound is performative, cosmogenic and transformative. It does not simply describe reality, it enacts and discloses reality as sacred presence. This insight becomes even more philosophically powerful in Tantric and Kashmir Saiva traditions, where it aligns with the doctrine of Spanda, the primordial vibration or throb of consciousness. Friends, if you have seen the newborn, the infants, you could see that there is a kind of spandan or vibration on their head, the topmost head, and that is considered the primordial vibration or throb of consciousness. So, spanda is the first pulse of awareness, the dynamic tremor through which pure consciousness moves towards manifestation. A sound is not physical acoustics alone, but the subtle ontological rhythm of becoming itself. The progression may therefore be presented as vibration that leads to pattern, to differentiation, to form, to cosmos. So, in our Indian knowledge tradition, we do not make Vāk and Śabda so simple that it is formed out of certain phonetic symbols and sounds. Rather, we go much deeper, a step further, to look at the beginning point from where it all starts, from vibration to pattern to differentiation and then to form and to cosmos. Matrika, the sacred body of letters. The concept of Matrika deepens the sonic argument by moving from meaning to the sacred ontology of letters themselves. In Tantric traditions, Matrak literally means little mothers. That means they refer to Sanskrit letters as the maternal seeds of manifestation. Every phoneme we are told is the smallest sound unit, and by meaningful combination of phonemes a sound is produced meaningfully. Every phoneme is treated not as a single living unit of Shakti, a vibrational power through which consciousness differentiates into this world. The alphabet becomes the architecture of manifestation. This idea links sound, goddess traditions, mantra and cosmology. Friends, in our Hindu mythology, sound plays a very important role. It is not that we can produce sounds just like that. There is something that is called mantra shakti. So, in Tantric traditions, the universe itself unfolds through these seed vibrations, and the goddess is worshipped as Matrika Shakti, the mothering matrix of language and creation. So, Om, Mantra and Jap, they are sound as consciousness practice. In our tradition, sound is not just a way of communicating some idea or some information, it is much more than that. It has the mantra shakti, it has the transforming power, it has the power, profound power to transcend us. The Mandukya Upanishad offers perhaps the most concentrated and philosophically luminous statement on sacred sound in all of Indian thought. Om ited aksharam midam sarvam. Om, this syllable is all this. This declaration is a profound ontological insight. The syllable Om is presented as the acoustic condensation of the entire cosmos, the sound form in which all states of experience and all dimensions of reality are gathered into a single vibrational principle. You might have seen lot of people in dhyana just chanting Om, and it has such a magical effect on the people, meaning thereby the sounds have magic. So, it is not only about any way you speak, but the way you speak. The Upanishad unfolds Om through the sequence of A-U-M, Aum, corresponding to the states of waking, Jagrat, dreaming, Swapna, deep sleep, Sushupta, and the silent transcendence of Turiya, the fourth beyond all conditioned states. In this way, sound becomes a map of consciousness itself. Okay. From this point, mantra jap, chanting of mantras, becomes philosophically intelligible as a disciplined inner practice. Why we are talking about all these things, friends, and how it relates to our modern concept of communication? Well, what I intend to convey is that, friends, your grasp and selection of words in a given situation gives you the most desired result or the most disastrous consequences. So, repetition is not mechanical ritualism or empty verbal recurrence, rather it is the intentional repatterning of awareness through rhythmic sound. So, it is not important what are we speaking, it is also important how are we speaking. The same piece of dialogue delivered by a C grade actor and delivered by an A grade actor will create two different impressions on the audience. Fine. So, this is why mantra in Indian tradition is never just semantic meaning, it is sound as transformative practice. So, it is not the mantra itself, Om Bhur Bhuvah Swaha, it is the way we pronounce it, the vibrations that it creates, the sound that it creates, that has the transforming, transcending, profound impact, and that is important. Ananda Kumara Swami reflections are particularly valuable here, because he repeatedly emphasizes that sacred syllables are not arbitrary signs, but formal condensations of metaphysical truth. So, sound, repetition, attention, inner stillness, transformation. So, sound is not simply sound, and why there is an importance of repeating or perfection in our sounds or speaking a word with proper pronunciation and enunciation, that is very important. Why? Because the sound certainly has a very big role in producing meaning. Vāk Śuddhi, we talk about Vāk Śuddhi. What is Vāk Śuddhi? Well, all of you have joined this course because you want to improve your soft skills, and one of the most important parts of soft skill is communication skill. Now, what is communication skill? How can we make it effective? somebody who speaks a faulty language, somebody whose pronunciation is not good, somebody who is not sonorous enough to listen to, somebody who is just bringing in words without thinking about their suitability or compatibility. Well, we put lot of stress on Vāk Śuddhi. Indian tradition is a sonic tradition, friends. Sound is considered very, very important. So, even if we read our Vedas or Ramayanas, we do it ritualistically in a particular way, and the more we practice, the more we become perfect in them. The Vāk Śuddhi, correction of our speech, and then ethics of speech, what we speak, how we speak, what we mean, they are all very important. So, speech is never treated as merely metaphysical or abstract, it is inseparable from ethics, character and the shaping of the self. So, the kind of language that you speak, friends, this is how people will perceive your personality. The concept of Vāk Śuddhi, purification of speech, occupies a vital place across our yogic, Vedantic, Buddhistic and devotional traditions. It implies not simply speaking correctly, but speaking in a manner aligned with Satya, that is truth, ahimsa, non-harm, restraint, clarity, compassion and intentional responsibility. So, what kind of communication may be considered good, friends? A communication that is free from any kind of bias, a communication which is gender neutral, caste neutral, race neutral, a communication that is clear, compassionate, considerate. So, you can never afford to be otherwise if you want to be a good communicator. Every utterance leaves an imprint on the mind of the speaker as well as the hearer. Words shape memory, affect emotion, organize relationships and gradually sediment into character. So, the kind of language that you speak and the way you speak, that becomes part of your character and disposition as well. And that is why, friends, good communication practices certainly place you above many people. This is why Indian traditions repeatedly insist that speech disciplines consciousness. Speech is not devoid of our consciousness, rather it is an expression, an extension of our consciousness. This is why language in Indian traditions may be understood as audible karma. Audible karma, what is that? People will come to know about us, will judge us based on what we say. Just as actions shape destiny, words too generate consequences, social, psychological and spiritual. A powerful comparative insight within Indian traditions is the resonance with Buddhist right speech, samyak vāk, where one avoids falsehood, divisive language, harsh speech and idle talk. So, friends, when we talk about communication, we always caution you not to use a language that may be hurtful to others. Yet the broader Indian framework deepens this by showing that purified speech is not only social virtue, but a spiritual technology of self mastery. It does not only help you achieve more in your professional life, rather it regulates yourself and becomes part of self purification process as well. Maun, Shunya and soundless source, friends, our tradition puts lot of emphasis on Maun, that is silence. Fine. Silence not as absence, but as the deepest modality of awareness. By keeping Maun Brat, we look inward, we understand ourselves more compared to when we are speaking. So, this is the decisive philosophical turn of the tradition. Sound is not privileged for its own sake, but because its highest purpose is to lead consciousness back to the source from which all articulations arise. Maun Brata, observing silence, therefore, is not mere muteness or social withdrawal, it is the ethical and contemplative refinement of speech into self awareness, where language is gradually interiorized until thought itself becomes transparent to consciousness. So, friends, we always talk about golden silence when we talk about communication. So, in the process of communication, you should observe that golden silence. Look for the right psychological moment, the right register to express yourself, that will give you the maximum benefit. The Tantric concept of anahat nada, the unstruck sound, sharpens this insight further. Ordinary sound depends on collision and physical vibration, but anahat names a subtle inner resonance that precedes external acoustics. The philosophical force of this idea lies in its challenge to materialistic assumptions. It suggests that the deepest structure of reality is not exhausted by sensory phenomena. Interestingly, Indian sonic philosophy refuses to absolutize language. The tradition therefore moves from communication to contemplation, from semantic clarity to existential stillness. That means, in Indian tradition, communication is not simple transfer of knowledge and ideas, it is much more deeper than that. Vāk, Śabda and Logos, Indian sonic ontology and Western logocentrism. We can understand it further by comparing it to Western concept. When we place the Indian concepts of Vāk, Śabda, Nāda and Sphoṭa alongside the Western tradition of logos and logocentrism, at first glance both civilizations seem to privilege language as foundational to reality. The Greek logos refines our understanding by signifying reason, discourse, principle and ordering intelligence, while the Indian Nāda Brahma identifies the word principle with the very structure of being. In the Western metaphysical tradition, especially from Plato through Christian theology to modern structuralism, language is often tied to the search for presence, origin and relational grounding. Like Derrida's critique of logocentrism becomes relevant here. He says that Western thought repeatedly privileges an originary logos as if meaning were self present and fully grounded in voice, consciousness or divine world. This creates what he famously identifies as the metaphysics of presence, where speech is treated as closer to truth than writing. By contrast, the Indian tradition moves in a different direction. Here sound, rather than merely being a rational discourse or representational signification, is vibration, manifestation and consciousness event. So, the emphasis is less on presence as fixed origin and more on dynamic emergence. So, this difference becomes even sharper in the final movement toward Mauna and Shunya. Derrida destabilizes the privileged center of logos by showing how meaning endlessly differs through difference. Indian sonic philosophy arrives at a different but equally radical point. It says that the highest truth of sound is its dissolution into silence. The culmination is not endless textual deferral alone, but experiential interiorization, where language leads beyond itself into contemplative awareness. So, language is not looked at as a superficial act, rather it transforms and forms part of our contemplative awareness. So, friends, we looked at Vāk, Śabda and sonic Indian sonic sound tradition, and we also compared it to the Western tradition. What was our intention in this discussion was how to approach communication, how to make the maximum out of communication. Should we treat it as a superficial act? Should the meaning be created by just resorting to certain words and expressions, or it is all encompassing, it is much more than that. Well, all of us have heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter. That means what is said is fine, but what remains unsaid in certain situations, that communicates more than what has been said. That means communication is not only about language, it is much more than that. And good communication, effective communication happens if we understand the very process of it. When we understand the different registers of it, the different agents involved. Fine. So, friends, I hope you found this lecture meaningful enough, and I look forward to your company in the next lecture, where we will talk further about some more concepts related to soft skills and communication. Thank you very much. Thank you.